So we're here today to discuss how to leverage the reset moment, how to not just get through COVID, but to create new opportunities and reinvent business as COVID recedes and the world resets. And I'm really delighted to be joined by Robin Bew, the Managing Director or CEO of the Economist Intelligence Unit, which is the research and analysis division of the Economist Group, which I'm sure all of you will know. It's perhaps best known for its authoritative periodical, The Economist. Robin is also a professor at IE Business School and a global speaker and trusted advisor to some of the world's most eminent companies on global trends and developments in business. And early in his career, he was a macroeconomist in the UK government treasury. Taking all that together, Robin has particular expertise in the global economy, emerging markets, and risk. So he is a fascinating person to bring a perspective to bear on how to leverage the reset moment. So Robin, welcome, and thanks for coming along.
That's great to be here. Thanks very much.
So in our minds, there's perhaps two broad types of opportunities. So the first type are adaptations that stick. An obvious example might be there's been a significant shift or perhaps acceleration towards e-commerce adoption across the board. And then there's upheavals. And that's a little bit different. That's focusing perhaps more on the role of COVID as a more fundamental disruptor. And the thought is that where something is global enough and deep enough, that there's a level of disruption that makes us question more fundamental assumptions and deeply held rules. And I guess the first question is, do you see a reset moment now for business? And if you do, taking each of those areas in turn, adaptations and upheavals, what are some of the big opportunities that you'd see, Robin?
Your characterization of adaptations and upheavals, I think, is quite useful just to think about a framework for thinking through what might happen. So on adaptations, I mean, you mentioned e-commerce, and I think that's self-evidently that's true. And I think more generally, and perhaps a little bit more interesting, everything I think is being accelerated. So the two I jotted down that I think are very interesting are e-learning and e-health, where those things were in existence before, and used particularly e-learning. I think you're seeing quite a bit more of that over the course of the last 5 years or so. The pandemic has clearly forced this very significant move to education being online, both primary, secondary, and actually tertiary as well. The next thing is e-health. So you've seen that there is an adoption lag. Hybrid working and asynchronous working is the other sort of adaptation. And I think what you're going to see is that people's working lives become much more fluid, and companies who are able to adapt their business processes to take advantage of that, I think will have an advantage over those that don't.
What you're saying is there's an opportunity to not just carrying on the virtual work that we're doing now, but to stand back and ask, how could work be redesigned given the way that it's now operating? And that's a much more sophisticated approach. That brings us to upheavals from adaptations. And that's something we find really quite interesting, the work that we do at OneLeap, because we spend a lot of time trying to help people internally create the conditions that are permissive to try things. So what would you say are the potential upheavals? And they might still be coming out yet, but what are some of the possibilities you'd point to?
Yeah, I mean, I jotted down three things that I thought are interesting. So the first one is what I call big government, or the role of government around the world. Coronavirus happened, and within like a month, we'd nationalised half of the workforce. I think that's just in the UK, but you saw similar things happening in other countries around the world. I think that we've seen a dramatic increase in the engagement of government in society. So this sort of subsidisation of a whole chunk of the private sector, this massive intervention in healthcare to deliver outcomes. I think it's going to be much more difficult now for politicians to spin a line that problems in their societies are beyond the capacity of government to fix.
And then you said there were two other things that you pulled out.
China this year is going to be probably the fastest growing economy in the world. It didn't actually decline overall last year. It's one of only 2 or 3 economies in the whole world that didn't shrink last year. Now it's got a very strong story about sort of efficiency and ability to deal with adversity. I think that can only accelerate this sense that the world is steadily bifurcating into 2 camps. There's a camp of countries that align with the Western world, so basically with Europe, with America, with Japan, and a group of countries which are going to align with China, and that's going to start affecting trade flows. It's going to start affecting investment flows. So as business has been disrupted, and you see more people working from home. One of the things that we're seeing among our clients, and you're hearing about from clients when they're talking about their clients, is that the hierarchical structure in organisations is sort of broken down or been flattened. In this environment, it's more difficult to do command and control. So one of the things that we're seeing is that it's decision making has become more diffuse through organisations, and therefore finding the right entry point into an organisation and managing to your interactions. So if you're trying to sell to someone or build an alliance or something, and that puts, I think, it means that the organisation to organisation relationships or business to business relationships, those things are going to be different going forwards from how they were before. The gatekeeper role, I think, is being downplayed now.
Is that an advantage perhaps to smaller players who can precision target and be a bit more guerrilla versus large players that just by their brand and by their sort of equivalent head of X role are going to be able to get into those traditional gate roles more easily?
I mean, whether it's an advantage, I think that's more difficult to say. I mean, I would say that it's disruptive. And in that disruption, you have the ability for new players to win.
While we're talking disruption, if we look at lessons from past disruptions for businesses wanting to successfully leverage the reset, what would you pull out?
Well, I think I guess there's two things. How does this change that's happened in the world, so the COVID change, or before that, the global financial crisis change, how does that create new opportunity or change in the business environment or the market opportunities that you have capabilities to address that perhaps would be tangential to the things that you're currently doing? So I think that for a lot of business leaders, the focus is on how to optimize the commercial sort of strategy that I have at the moment. Where do I go after new customers? And so to be able to step back from that and say, actually, inside my organization, I have this sort of groundbreaking capability, which I'm only deploying for my own benefit, but could be deployed for our clients' benefits in another way. I guess the second thing is something I'm actually very keen on, which we used to call sticking to the knitting, which is that I think most businesses, for most businesses, their most successful innovations are innovations around things that they already understand, because market understanding is a crucial component about what enables firms to be successful. And as a result of that, you ought to be able to identify these sort of nascent trends and get ahead of them.
Are there any last tips for leaders in large companies seeking to leverage the reset that you would impart?
I would say there's three things. I guess talking to customers about about how these disruptions we talked about are likely to affect them. So I think, and that's very different from this conversation about needs. I'd say be prepared to stop doing things, which I see that executives find that very, very difficult. So this idea that in a world in which we think things are changing more quickly than usual, there's a lot of focus on doing new stuff. There needs to be an equal focus on stopping doing old stuff. And then the final thing is, I've got this word that we use a lot in the Economist group about being brave. But I would just say the one thing we know for certain is that the world is going to be hugely different in 2 years' time from how it was 2 years ago. And it would be crazy to think that your business can be successful by doing exactly the same stuff as it was doing 2 years ago in that environment. So you have to be brave.
Yeah, and stasis is a choice. So
yeah.
Have to be brave. I like that. That's a great place to end it. Robin Bew, Managing Director of the Economist Intelligence Unit. Thank you. Very, very appreciative of your comments.
Thank you very much.